I'm from an Italian family, and everybody in my family had the musical gene. They were all musicians, they were all self-taught, or they went to school after many years of playing and being self-taught. My mom went to Juilliard. My uncles went into the service, as um, military people, but they were in the USO bands and everything. And I just grew up listening to music. All my life. I used to accompany my mom to the NBC studios in New York when she'd go up and sing on the Arthur Godfrey show or the Perry Como show. I'd sit back, with all the production people while she was on TV and talking to the hosts. And that's kind of the way I grew up. I got my first guitar in October of 1954 and started playing on that. And I've been playing ever since. And just being around music, you somehow soak it up. It's like some kind of infusion or osmosis that takes place, and you learn to distinguish chords in your head. You learn to memorize melodies, which for a musician is really a big deal, because if you can hear it in your head, you can play it. You can interpret what's in your mind and your heart. And I got to the point where I could listen to whole symphonies in my head and dissect the parts and put them back together. I used to listen to Brahms, Beethoven, Wagner, because Wagner had so many, melodies going all at the same time. And that's kind of how I trained myself internally to be a musician. This bad boy here is Elvis. I call him Elvis because it's so gaudy. It sort of reminds me of Elvis in the latter days in his jumpsuit, where he's kind of putting on a little bit of weight. I mean, it's got a pompadour, it's got mother of toilet seat, mother of abalone, and mother of pearl all in one fell swoop. And it's chrome-plated brass. But the thing about Elvis is, I don't play him like this. I play him like this. I was compelled to go to the guitar. I wasn't forced to take lessons. And so for me, every time I got on the guitar, it was a really energizing experience. And so I was just grateful for little things that I would get. And I seemed to make enough progress on my own that it was an ever-fulfilling process. So the real frustrations didn't occur until after I got actually pretty decent on my instrument. Then I started learning other people's things, and so I think the first real challenge that I can remember was in 1965, trying to learn the classical version of Girl from Ipanema on a nylon string guitar. And I got it, but it took a while, and boy, that did pose a challenge because it's all at different techniques and everything. And then I tried singing the Portuguese lyrics phonetically, just by reading the lyrics, and that was a dismal failure. I was born as a musician. I mean, that's the way I came out of my mother's womb. And I just wouldn't be the same person. I'd be somebody else. And you can't imagine that. It'd be like imagining an alternate universe. All I know is that from the very beginning, when I started doing stuff, I like to draw, I like to paint, I like to play the guitar, and I like to sing. And that was just something that came out for me. And for a long time, I didn't know whether I wanted to be an artist or a musician, and both were weighing heavily on me, you know. Um, and I do both pretty well, you know. I mean, I'm really lucky. I got a good set of skills that I was born with genetically, and I spent a lot of time training those skills and learning techniques, you know, and like they say, 10,000 hours and you start to get the hang of something. Well, I spent 10,000 hours in doing all of that stuff. So that's why I wear two hats. You know, I do museum displays and I do all of that work, and it just comes from within. And I play music, and I do all of that work, and it just comes from within too. Um, I just couldn't imagine doing anything else. This bad boy here is a 1920s Oahu acoustic guitar. It's got a square neck, and it's made for playing on your lap, Hawaiian style. These guitars were responsible for starting the mad craze in Hawaiian guitar. These guitars were responsible for the inception and dissemination of playing slide guitar. This is where it all started. There's an argument that can be made that this instrument and this style of playing gave rise to the solo lead in music and the electric guitar. And the reason I say that was because when this style first started coming out, people were doing lead solos. They weren't doing lead solos so much anymore. The guitar was basically a rhythm instrument, and you could do some interesting chord things, but not really many solos. I mean, some people were doing, but not many. So as the rise in Hawaiian music spread over the Western culture, people started doing slide more, and they started doing solos because it would add something to the music. As people were doing these solos with a band, you couldn't hear them very well, so they said, well, we got to figure something to do so that you can hear it better, which gave rise to guitars like Elvis here. And they have this resonator which acts as an amplifier, and so here as I just play this, you can hear how much louder it is than this. This was basically the first way to amplify a guitar. Still, in a bar, as loud as this is, wasn't really loud enough. That's when people started putting pickups on guitars. They started using microphone cartridges, they started using phonograph cartridges, anything to boost the volume. So again, I go back to the beginning and say that this instrument here in this style of Hawaiian and slide playing gave birth to the guitar solo and gave rise to electric instruments, and was kind of foundational in the pop music we know today as blues, rock and roll, and electric jazz. At one point I bought a 4-track TEAC A3340S reel-to-reel tape recorder, and that was the biggie for me at the time. You know, this was in 1975, and people said, hey, that's a pretty sexy machine there, can I do a demo tape? I said, sure, come on in, you know. And then a friend of mine said, well, we need a commercial for one of the TV stations in the area. Could you do it for us? We're going to bring in a bunch of actors, and we're going to, you know, try a radio spot. And that was the first time I did anything like that, and it turned out so well. I just kept getting jobs. I never had to advertise. I never had to put out any promotional gear, and I would just get jobs one after another. So I worked with all of the major TV stations around here. It was before cable, so I worked with the big three, NBC, ABC, CBS. I worked with the UHF channels. You know, I was in John Lanigan's studio when he was hosting the afternoon movies, you know. And then when I went to grad school, one of the fellows in my music class was a cultural specialist for the government. And he started recording the people who were dying out that were, later to become our national treasures, some of the last of the blues guys. And so I would start to record those people. And I got to record Tom Paxton, Pete Seeger, Doc Watson, Richie Havens, Joan Baez, Billy Preston, Yoko Ono. I can't even remember them all, just one after another. Sometimes week to week, I'd get to work with these personalities. One time, I was on stage and there was a lot of confusion going on, and there was a guy, Vassar Clements, violin player. He did studio work for virtually everybody in the country western world. And I'm setting up the stuff on stage, and somebody said, "Would you move Vassar's microphone over?" But I didn't hear because of the noise. And I'm thinking he's talking about some kind of microphone. So I said, "What's the Vassar mic? Which one is that?" And I hear this guy behind me laughing, and I turned around, and my buddy says, "That's Vassar Clements." I didn't even know who the guy was at the time. So I moved his mic. We got to be pretty decent friends, and everything was fine. And I did work like that for years and years and years, maybe 25 years, Just, it was great. I mean, I would go to events where people would pay big money, and that we made buttons that said, "I'm being paid to be here," and that was our backstage pass. This is the Oahu Tone Master. It's from the early 30s. It's so old, the serial number is 528, and it's made to do this kind of music. Some folks are built like this, some are built like that. The way I'm built, you can call me fat. I'm built for comfort, I'm not built for speed. Well, I remember when we were doing the Cuyahoga Valley folk concerts, and we did them for about 12 years. 2 of them were the national folk concerts. Richie Havens would come. I recorded him multiple times. So one day we were setting up, and it started pouring rain. I mean, it was a deluge, just pouring rain. Nobody left. You could look from the stage and you'd see like 5,000 umbrellas, and nobody was moving. The guys that had the sound company, Woodsies from Kent, got out all these tarps, and we were throwing tarps over the speakers to keep them from getting wet. And I was just finishing up covering one of the speakers. I was just getting ready to walk off stage, and it was very crowded. And out comes Richie Havens with his guitar, and he starts talking to the crowd about how he was really glad that they wouldn't leave, and he appreciated it so much he was going to play "Here Comes the Sun" for them. I couldn't get off of the stage because I would have had to really, literally move Richie Havens and his guitar out of the way, walk in front of him, and leave. He starts playing the song, and I thought, well, hell with it. I'm going to stay here. I got a front row seat for at least this song. So I just stood there. He did his song. Everybody cheered, and as they were clapping, I made my beeline. I said, "I got to get out of here, man. I'm trapped." He patted me on the back as I went out. Well, after he was done, he was backstage, and the next act was coming out. I think it was Arlo Guthrie. And we sat in the back and we started talking. And I said, back in the 60s, I used to do a song of yours, a song called "Parable of Ramon." And he goes, "Really?" And we talked for 45 minutes about the Parable of Ramon, and how, things would happen in his life in stages that were kind of connected with that song, and people that really liked it, which were few and far between, actually, would just keep presenting themselves until, at this point, I presented myself with my story. I got to see him one more time after that at another event, puts his hand on my shoulder. He goes, "Parable of Ramon, right?" Yes. Is a 1946 Gibson ES 125. In the days when this was first manufactured, this was the most ubiquitous electric guitar made. They made more of these than they made of any other model, any manufacturer anywhere, until the Strats and the Les Pauls and the Telecasters came out. But this guy is known as an archtop hollow body, and it's used for blues, it's used for playing bottleneck, it's also used for finger picking jazz. I have some flat wounds on here, and this is kind of what this sounds like. You say you're hurting, gonna lose your mind. The man you love treats you so unkind. Things go wrong, wrong with you, it hurts me too. You better leave, you better put him down. I'm not gonna see you pushed around. Things go wrong, wrong with you, it hurts me too. When I was in graduate school, one of my assistantships, I was the graduate advisor for ACPB at Kent State. That's the All Campus Programming Board. And we had a series of concert that year that was, it was just a banner year. We had everybody. And one of the acts we had was Graham Nash, and he was by himself, and he was supposed to come and talk about bigotry. And my students in a all-campus programming board asked me if I would open the show to play the opener, and I said sure. I was thrilled to death, you know. So when we were talking to Graham Nash's people and coordinating the particulars for the event, they said, well, he's feeling a little nervous because he's by himself and he doesn't play solo, and you know, he's probably a little bit uncomfortable. Why don't you play a couple of their songs to make him feel at home? I said, be glad to. And then the students from the May 4th task force said, well, since May 4th of 1970 was your first day in Kent and you were here the day of the shootings, we would like you to play Ohio. And I said I'd be glad to. So I did my opening spot there, and I played For Dead in Ohio, and you know, everything was really great. And then the stage boss comes out and says, you got to stop now. I said, well, why? He says, because Graham's getting all nervous because you're really good and he doesn't want to follow you. And then he said, well, hell with it, play one more song. So I played one more song and I got off of there. So I thought everything was going along okay, and then about halfway through Graham Nash's soliloquy, I guess, he says, and I'd like to thank Guy for basically playing the foundational review of my musical heritage. He says, but oh, Guy, he says, if Neil Young were dead, he'd be rolling over in his grave at your version of Ohio. And I was mortified. I went, and because this is in front of the whole student body, and I thought I did a smash-up job on it, you know, but he had some issues with people playing their music and about trying to be them, you know, and so unbeknownst to me, I fell into that ilk of people trying to be him, you know. So after it was over, we were all backstage, and he asked me about, you know, different things, and I had played the song Guinevere that they did on their first album, and I played all the parts in the tunings, and I couldn't sing all the parts naturally, but I could play them on the guitar, and I thought it was pretty damn good, you know. And he said, where'd you get the chords for Guinevere? That was kind of interesting. I said, well, I got out of the songbook. And he started going into this thing about these songbooks and about how people are trying to be them, you know. So I basically lost heart at that point. I was supposed to give him a recording of the event, which I did, and I wrote him a little letter, and I said, you know, You guys write songs, you write about Vietnam. I was there. You write about the assassination of John Kennedy. I was there. I grew up in Dallas. I was right around the corner. You write about Kent State. I was there. I was behind the guardsmen. All of these life events that you sing about, I got to see firsthand. And if you don't think that turns your brain around, well, you're crazy. And I wrote all this stuff in the letter, and I said, seeing all of these things freaks you out. It makes you, in your mind full of torment and full of anxiety. And sometimes the only way to get rid of that is to sing these songs. And it gives us pleasure. So if people sing your music, first it's because they love it. They love you. Nobody can be you because you wrote the song, but the biggest tribute is for people to play your music. And in a cultural sense, that's what keeps it alive. My 1962 J45. And I bought this guitar in pieces. I paid $1,100 for a bunch of pieces of guitar in a bucket. A friend of mine out in Brady Lake, a guy named Greg Gaffel, works magic with these guitars. He put it back together. And now I have a beautiful guitar, a beautiful vintage 1962 J45. And I have this in a special tuning. This is a Hawaiian tuning. So you can play pieces like... So you get these beautiful, exquisite tones from these tunings. And the thing that a tuning gives a solo guy like me is drone strings. So you get the bass parts that fill in, and it gives you that extra oomph that you need without having backup players. One of the things, I do a lot of instrumentals on my guitar, and I interpret things musically, where a lot of people, they'll write a lyric about it. If I see something, I describe it with a melody, and after that, the process is done. And unless you know that, you really don't listen to my stuff and then think, oh, well, there's a metaphor in there, or there's a meaning, or there's a description. You just think, oh, well, that's a pretty piece of music. I really wish that they'd ask me about the meaning behind some of these things, the meaning behind some of these tunings. I carry 6 guitars to a gig, and it's because of the slide playing, it's because of the different tunings, and it took me a long time to get to this place, to learn those tunings, to write the music in those tunings, to express those feelings melodically. This particular instrument is called a double neck lap steel. It also is an Oahu. This is the Leilani model from the 1950s, and you can see that it is all covered with yellow mother of toilet seat, a kind of a plastic that they used back then. What this guitar gives you is the versatility to be able to do songs in different keys without having to tune or without having to pick up another instrument. So you have, this one is tuned in E, this one is tuned in C. I like to think of myself as a premier slide player at this point in my career, and I see these kids that can just play the crap out of it, There's plenty of really, really good music there. Whether it comes out across on the commercial media or not, that's another thing. And there are some good things that come out on commercial media that are actually pretty good that I don't necessarily care for, but I can respect them that, they're well done, that the people are really doing it. There's a lot of schlock out there too. I don't think there's as much mainstream music that has an emotional connection with people the way it did when my generation was younger. That's not to say there is no emotional connection with the kids of today, but it's a different kind of connection. You know, it's not the metaphor of the deeper meaning in life as much as it is what's on my mind at this present time, and let me forget about my horrible life of going to college, kind of. Your cheating heart will make you weep. You're crying, try to sleep, but sleep won't come the whole night through. Your cheating heart will tell on you. It's harder and harder to be a live musician now because people don't necessarily want to come out and hear music. They can get it hi-fi at home. They have Sirius radio. In the culture today, people are not used to going out and seeing live music, and that's one of the differences. When my generation was younger, there wasn't as much different kind of music on the media available like today. You would have to go out to hear some of these good bands because they weren't playing them on the radio. I mean, it was a while before they played Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin on the radio, and actually at that it wasn't until FM stations started becoming stronger and more dominant. So people were programmed. They were culturally susceptible to going and hearing live music. Today it's not the case. When you hear somebody live and you play, they demand attention from you. When you go to a classical concert, that music demands something of you, and you have to pay attention. I wish we had more of that today, And it's nobody's fault, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong. It's just an aspect of cultural change that has occurred that we as musicians have to accommodate for. I'm an old guy, so they're not going to see the young fella perform, and they're not going to see the Joe Bonamassa guy doing all these flashy licks. They're going to see a guy who's been playing the guitar for a long time, whose main objective is to play music as beautifully as I can, to sing as beautifully as I can, to make no mistakes, and to reach people's hearts. That affective value and attitude that people have, I want to reach in there, and I want to make them feel something. I want them to feel the metaphor of the music that I'm playing. I want them to forget a little bit about what's been going on in their lives and escape and listen to the music. And what I want them the most to take away is the memory of the music I play. Not of me, of my music. I mean, I naturally want people to like me. Everybody does. But when I'm performing on stage, it's about the art. It's about the music. And I look at my music as art. It's got to be good. It's got to be well practiced, well rehearsed. Technically, it's got to be good. But emotionally, it has to be effective. And that is all I want.